fifth study around God's abundance took us to a parable told by Jesus in Luke's Gospel. It's a fairly short parable, so I will read it out. It's from the 8th chapter of Luke, verses 4 to 8. When a great crowd gathered and people from town after town came to Jesus, he said in a parable, "A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell on the path and was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew with it and choked it. Some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, "Let anyone with ears to hear listen." It's a very simple parable, and one that anyone who's gone to church for any length of time has heard many, many times. Those of us who are gardeners would turn immediately to thinking about all of the complicated things we have to do to make sure that seeds germinate. Are we planting good seeds? Are we planting them at the right time? Have we found the right soil mix? Are they going to get enough sun, enough water, enough nurturing of all different kinds? Other people's minds turn to the seeds that are seemingly wasted, to the rocky soil, to the thorns, to all of those circumstances that will keep the seed from turning into something abundant, that 100-fold increase that the rich soil promises. We can look at the sower as being pretty reckless. We can look at the sower as just simply throwing seeds out, and the supply being so limitless, so abundant, that it doesn't actually matter whether some of them are wasted. There was an awful lot of discussion about, where do we go here? And we also talked about, are we the sower or are we the soil? Or are we both at different points in our lives and in our faith journeys? Which role do we identify ourselves the most in? Do we see ourselves as a nurturer? Do we see ourselves as somebody sowing love? Someone made a very potent and powerful comment that perhaps these seeds are really meant to be an example of God's love, and us sharing love, sharing healing, sharing a helping hand with the people in our communities. And that we don't worry about the consequences. We merely sow love. And then, of course, the discussion led us to consider whether or not we know that we are sowing love, whether or not we're doing the right thing, and the element of trust or discernment involved in that process. So out of these few verses, we really got to the core of what it means to be a follower of Christ, a pilgrim in the way of love. What are we to do with all of these gifts? How much are we meant to worry about the gifts versus how much are we simply meant to pass them along? This was another one of those discussions where teasing out the questions, poking at the parable, led to an ever deeper consideration of what our relationship with God is like and what God really represents. So as we go into our final study together next Wednesday at 7, I have asked the group to try and draw a composite picture of God, the God of such abundant promise, of such abundant delivery, and of such abundant metaphor, that is our God. And who is he? Who is God? And what are we to make of him? What are we to do with him? And what are we to do for him? So much to think about. It's a lifetime's worth, really, but rich fodder for great conversation. We'll see you next week. Blessings.